Well, thank you very much to all of our witnesses. That concludes our witness testimony. We'll move now to the questions and answers portion of our hearing, and I will begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes for questions. Mr. Jeffries, let me start with a project that is critically important to my district, and it's one I think you're aware of. BNSF has proposed to build a multimodal transfer facility in the city of Barstow, which is in my district. It's going to bring over 20,000 jobs to my community. And the purpose of the facility is to transfer freight from the ports of Long Beach to Los Angeles. Instead of putting them on trucks, which is what happens now, they want to put them on rail cars, put them by rail out to Barstow, and then switch them to other trains going other places in the country. So that would shift the transportation of millions of tons of freight from truck to rail. Now, BNSF has said very publicly that should this proposed in-use locomotive rule become enforced, that they would no longer be able to build this facility in Barstow, and they're in the middle of building it now. They would stop and build it somewhere else because they can't afford to have freight locomotives that can't go into California and have to switch at the state border. Would make the whole system completely nonsensical for them, and I understand that. But help me understand this. It seems to me, from a layman's perspective, that for CARB to take an action that forces the transport of millions of tons of freight by truck that emits 3 times as much greenhouse gases per pound of freight moved instead of rail would be completely nonsensical and the opposite of the goal that they're trying to achieve. Am I missing something there?
You're not missing anything, and it's completely counterintuitive to CARB's overarching goals. And these are the types of projects that we should all be celebrating and championing. This is a $1.5 billion project, be the largest intermodal yard in the country, all done with private dollars, not public dollars. And to your point, taking thousands of trucks off a very congested corridor, putting it on rail, getting it out of the LA basin into an area to sort for long haul across the country. It's exactly the sort of thing we should want to see happening, and it would be such a missed opportunity if this project were put at risk because of this rule.
And to amplify the point, that corridor that you're referring to that is currently heavily trucked, that's also in my district, and so I have a vested interest in making sure that we shift those emissions to something that's 3 times more efficient. All right, Mr. Abbs, I had a question for you. I was interested in your testimony about the fact that freight locomotives in California were one of the largest emitters of health-threatening pollutants. And that was your oral testimony. In your written testimony, you had a fact that you quoted that said locomotives represent 31% of the pollution reductions needed to meet federal air quality requirements under the Clean Air Act. And that 31% really caught my eye because the statistics that the EPA gave us is that railroads make up less than 2% of transportation emissions and only about 0.05% of overall greenhouse gas emissions. So can you tell me where that 31% statistic came from? Because I'm having trouble reconciling it.
Yes, Chair. Thank you for that question. So that number comes from from CARB's state SIP that they turned in for the 2022 SIP standard. So it represents the difference in emissions that that California would need to achieve to meet 2037 Federal Clean Air Act requirements for particulate and NOx.
All right. Well, I'm going to have to chase down why those numbers are so different because that seems to counter to the data that the EPA is giving us. And Tyler, let me conclude here. I've got a minute left here. One of the arguments for completely electric zero emissions locomotives is that even if it's not possible to pack enough energy into batteries in a locomotive form factor, it is possible to just have tenders that are towed behind the locomotive with more and more batteries. And even if you need 10 of those tenders to do the job of one diesel locomotive, that's feasible. But you know, that's the argument. Do you see some merit in that? Is that true, or is that something that you are skeptical about?
Well, that's something that my research group has been actively looking at. Well, technically feasible to couple up as many tenders as needed to provide the battery power. There is the operational consideration of train length. So in the United States, roughly 70% of the primary principal mainline corridors are single track lines. And it's going to only have one train operating at a time. And these trains pass each other at very short sections of double track called passing sidings. And the length of those passing sidings can limit the length of a freight train. So anytime you take away that available length of a freight train and consume it with battery tenders or tenders of any sort, you're going to be reducing the potential number of rail cars that can be transporting revenue-earning freight on those trains. And by doing that, you're not only earning less revenue per freight train, but you're also transporting less freight and making them overall less efficient. So there's an efficiency penalty dictated by the maximum train length that tenders impose on the network and operations.
All right, thank you. I'll now recognize Ranking Member Fucci for 5 minutes for her questions.